part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey, what's good, everyone? Thanks for stopping by. You're listening to Sabol Brothers on the Baseline Podcast, all part of the Press Play Podcast Network. We're your hosts, John Sabol.
And I'm Scott Sabol.
How you doing, everyone? We have a treat of an episode for you today. Somebody that Scott and I both grew up watching on television as kids, growing up in Hudson, Ohio, and someone that Scott has been working with for the last 20 years, and someone that I'll be working with eventually here as a member of the Fox 8 News team coming up here later on this year. Our guest today is none other than Fox 8 Sports Director John Telich. Scott, he has worked in Cleveland at Fox 8 for 41 years, since 1980. That's incredible to have a career that long, let alone all at one place.
And he's got so many great stories, I'm sure, starting in 1980, covering Cleveland sports. I know he covered sports outside of Cleveland as well. I'm really looking forward to this because I know there's a bunch of them we want to cover, and I'm sure there's going to be a bunch more that he's going to bring up that we're going to go, wait a minute, I forgot about that. Wow, that was really interesting. This is something I'm really looking forward to, and I guarantee you this is going to be one of those episodes that probably goes and runs kind of longer than our normal ones. I guarantee it'll be well worth it. So join us with the interview here with John Telich, sports director, journalist from WJW Fox 8, and we will have the interview and all the great stories right after this.
Hey, I'm Jason.
And I'm Gary, and we love ball cards.
And if you love ball cards too, good news. You just found your new favorite podcast. From breaks to grading.
And from collecting to flipping, join us on the Ball Card Show.
The sports podcast for the sports collector.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Hey everyone, I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Jeremy Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need each week to get you ready for kickoff and beyond.
Don't miss our breakdowns of each week's matchups, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we all know, Holly, dogs got to eat.
That's right, Jeremy. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of The Orange is Oranger Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Well, everyone, this man here in Cleveland sports requires no introduction, but we're going to give him a long introduction anyway because he deserves it. He has been a longtime sportscaster, journalist, kind of a man of all trades here at WJW Fox 8 for 41 years. He has been on the air since September of 1980. He has covered so many huge sporting events. And I mean, you name it. If you think of Cleveland sports and you think of sports journalism here in Cleveland and Northern Ohio, you think of this man. Joining us live is WJW Fox 8 sportscaster, journalist, John Telich. John, how are you? It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It is great to be on with you guys. I've heard a few of your episodes. I love the one about the court and the old Richfield Coliseum, but keep up the great work, and it's good to be on with both you guys.
Hey, JT, thanks for the kind words, man. This is special for us because Scott has been working with you for how many years now, Scott?
It's about almost 20 years.
And,
wow.
And it's been that long. And for those that don't know, I first met you, JT, one day when Scott was working when I was a senior in high school in 2003. I came in to shadow you one weekend. And, a few years later in college, I became your intern for one summer. And you've been a fantastic mentor to me as I embarked on this crazy television career of my own, helping me with, critiques, suggestions, advice, resumes, all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. So, it's kind of come full circle for us and for me too.
Well, it's kind of cool too, that, you'll be joining the gang and just being part of our our great stable of outstanding, journalists and sports folks here at Fox 8. So I couldn't be happier for that aspect of the deal, but it was always a pleasure to hang with you, to talk with you, to give you a little bit of advice. And that's what I get more pleasure out of over the years, just having not necessarily a say, but maybe a little bit of input or a good word, a piece of advice, something to keep an individual inspired and motivated. And I really think your true worth is how you build up other people, not just how you build up yourself.
Yeah, well said, and I appreciate that. Thank you. It's been a great journey, and I'm glad we can get you on here and talk Cleveland sports and everything that we know, and want to know some great stories about where you came from in Cleveland, and then all the fun stuff that people may not know.
Well, I grew up in Euclid, Ohio, and I always wanted to be a sportscaster. I was one of those kids that grew up in this city, and I used to listen to the broadcasts of the Browns games, broadcasts of the Indians games, and wanted to be one of those people. Always wanted to have an opportunity at least to tell the stories of the great athletes here in Northeast Ohio. And so not that dissimilar to a lot of young folks that wanted to get into the TV business. And I was fortunate. I went to Ashland College. The biggest reason I got to Ashland College was my brother was there the year before.
Oh, no kidding.
And yeah, I'm on the air with with you guys, the Sabol Brothers. And when we were growing up, he was Big T and I was Little T, because my brother kind of paved the path for me to get to college, to Ashland. And when I got to Ashland, I just got immersed into all things radio and TV, and I learned the ropes from some fantastic people, Larry Heiner, Dick Lighty. I can never speak about my career without giving them a shout out. I'm so beholden to them. It was just wonderful. And then fortunate to work in 3 small markets to build my resume, and then to get back to Fox 8, or back then it was a CBS affiliate, and get to Channel 8 in 1980, and the start of a real wonderful journey covering sports here in Northeast Ohio.
So, John, you talk about how you always wanted to be a sportscaster. Did you have a sportscaster idol growing up? I'll give you an example. Like for me and my brother, of course, it would have been listening to Joe Tate and Nev Chandler. For you, who would it have been?
Well, it was Casey Coleman's father. Ken Coleman was a phenomenal sportscaster. He's a Hall of Fame caliber play-by-play guy on many different sports. And he did a lot of TV work back in the 60s at the ABC affiliate, Channel 5. And he hosted a show called The Quarterback Club, which was basically the rehashing of the highlights of the game that took place in the weekend before. So he was one of my quote unquote idols. Gibb was a tremendous influence to me. When I went to Ashland College and I did the sports every night on the Channel 2 station, the TV station there on campus, I envisioned myself as Gibb Shanley. And in those times, Channel 5 was just a monster in the local they had the Eyewitness News team with Dorothy Fuldheim and John Hambrick and Gibb and Don Webster. And I always envisioned myself to be like him. On the national level, you can't talk about sports and scene setting and storytelling and capturing the moment without discussing the great Jim McKay. And he was the Olympic host for so many years, which also, as the years went by and he faded into the background, then Bob Costas took over. But first and foremost, my influences were Gibb, and Jim McKay was really huge. And what I wanted to do to be able to be at big events and to have an opportunity to describe them.
Hey, John, a follow-up question, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds about journalism too much,
sure,
but you probably know this. I like the history of things. It gives me perspective in my head. And when I go around the station, I talk to, people who worked at the station, especially with me, we remember the days where it was, tape. And then you had the 3/4 tape, the bigger tapes. When you were in college, were you guys still shooting on film back in the mid 70s, or had you made the transition to tape already?
Well, at Ashland, we had just very minor amount to shoot, and it was videotape. It was reel-to-reel videotape that you lugged around, this big, bulky, gigantic suitcase thingy. And so we taped in that respect. But when I got out into my first couple of jobs, Rapid City, South Dakota was my first one. We shot film and we were into tape. And then in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the same deal. We shot film. I shot film. I processed the film. I spliced the film together. I made the A roll and the B roll, and we rolled those simultaneously. And that's how a story went on the air. And I just found that to be not just fascinating, but a great way to learn the craft. Because guys, nowadays you can go out and shoot a bazillion minutes worth of content and cut it down into your 2-minute story. Back then, they gave me a roll of film, 100 feet of film or 400 feet of film, and you had to make that work. So you had to be a little bit more judicious as to what you shot, how it was composed, how it would fit into the greater context of the story. So I have the distinct pleasure and also experience to have worked in the film, quote unquote, genre before it became tape. And then now, of course, it's all digital.
That's when you say when you say splice the film, do you literally take the film and do you splice it like with a with a knife and then put them together? Is that how that would have been?
What you had was you had this contraption that you put the one side of the film to the other side. You put them together, you cut it, and then you rubbed off the residue from the one side. You applied glue to that, and then you pressed them together. And then when that was, after a minute or so of that, you could take that out and hang it. We used to have these contraptions that had hooks on them, and you would hang by the sprockets the film, and it would hang down, and you'd see, all right, that's my shot of the quarterback throwing the pass. Okay, that's the shot of the tackle made by the defensive lineman. And then here's the film of the overview of the high school football practice, as it were, whatever story I was covering. And then you splice those reels together in order to make a story, in order to roll it on the air.
Yeah, that's incredible, because in college, when I was at Kent State, we had one of my teachers who has since passed away. His name was Gary Hansen. He was one of my teachers that I had for years in the journalism field. And he had some of those old reel-to-reel, cameras in the classroom that he would show us, like in history. I just don't understand how you guys back in the day would carry that to practice and everything. The big, because it would fold up into a briefcase, like a big, plastic or hard metal case. That is just unheard of to think about doing that back in the day.
Well, also back then when I was in Buffalo and I was in the process of putting videotape highlights together. Let's say it's a Sabres game. Sabres are playing. We are rolling on this gigantic machine in the control room. It's got 2-inch wide videotape, and it's recording the game. And so I would have to be in that room with the engineer and say, at this particular instance on the film and the time on the film, that's the beginning of the shot. And he would have to manually go set a cue to start the edit. And then he would roll both machines at the same time, the machine that had the video on it and the machine we're going to put the highlight onto. It was very cumbersome. It made me appreciate, nowadays I sit back and see how quick and fast people can put stories together. Heck, we can edit stories on our phones now. And back then it was really cumbersome. So again, it just kind of made me appreciate the process, and knowing that I've had a career that's been long enough to go back to the film days and then transition to today's internet era, social media type of a scenario.
So JT, when you got to Cleveland in 1980, obviously you were born and raised in Cleveland, but when you came back after your few other stops,
yes.
Man, you picked a great year to start your Cleveland sports broadcasting journey, covering the Browns and the Cardiac Kids.
I really did. The first game I covered was they had already started the season, but I think they played the Kansas City Chiefs. They won that day. And when I started at Channel 8, and kudos to and thanks very much to Virgil Dominic for hiring me way back then. But when I started there, Jim Mueller was the main sports guy. I came in to do the weekend sports. I was replacing the late, great Freddie McLeod. And when I started at Channel 8, Jim Mueller took me everywhere around the city. Jim was so connected within the sports community of Cleveland, and Jim would introduce me to, I met, Sam Rutigliano. I didn't just meet them like, here's a guy starting his job. Jim really helped pave the way for me. I knew all the Indians. I knew that knucklehead Doug Deacon from the jump, right when I started covering Browns practices and whatever. So Jim was invaluable guy to work with. And that's what it was like. It was the Browns were the big deal. In that season, they won a game on the road in Houston. And I'm not kidding you. There had to be about 10,000 people at the airport when they came back from Houston. It was off the charts. It was crazy, but it also was a harbinger, if you will, to know if you're outside looking in at Cleveland football, how insane the fan base is here in Northeast Ohio, how much they want a winner, and how obviously they're still waiting for that winner, but one day it's going to come.
So the following year, 1981, of course, with the Indians, and they weren't the best. The 70s were not a decade that was kind to the Indians, but of course, the no-hitter, right? Lynn Barker's no-hitter. Can you take us back to that day? I mean, everyone says they were at the game, but what was the reality of that for you kind of on the inside?
Well, first of all, guys, we back in those days, there were only 3 TV stations. So I felt very honored to be in a very tiny little fraternity that and people got their news from the 6 or the 11 o'clock news. And back then, the 3 stations did 6 and 11 news and very little else during the regular day. So I would do my 6 o'clock sportscast. I was doing it on May 15th of 1981. I did the 6, and 6:30, I hustled down to the stadium because I always wanted to make sure I was present at as many games as possible. So I'm down there. I'm watching this game. They're about 3 innings into it, and I'm just getting the feeling you just had that sense, the way Lenny looked, the way his curveball was, just everything about Lenny looked like it was going to be a rough night for. So you were thinking there is potential for a no-hitter. So I was a one-man band back then. I had the cameraman with me at the station, but there was no sports producer. There was no one back at the station to keep tabs on things for me. So I hustled back to the station. I put together most of the show other than the real Indian stuff. And then I raced back and I made arrangements. And to do live shots back then, it wasn't as snap your fingers kind of a thing. So I had to make sure we had the right people in place so that I could be live at the stadium if it was needed. And sure enough, it was. It was an amazing night. And so it happens. And me and my cameraman, we rush out onto the field and we're out there. We're on the mound. We're with, the players are just hugging Lenny and they're jumping up and down. And we're right on the edge of that. And as soon as that started to break up and Lenny was being escorted off the mound, I tried to get close to him. And I remember getting knocked back by one of the security people. But it was just an amazing electric night. It wasn't a great night. We all know that lakefront, as you know, Scotty, you've done the weather here for so many years. You know how precarious the weather can be. I mean, that was May 15th and it still felt like it was in March, So, we did the interview with Lenny and I was really fortunate that I had a great team of people that worked around us that night and we were able to get a pretty good reporter on the air and I was pretty proud of it.
JT, would you say that's your favorite municipal stadium memory?
I would say the most memorable for me, as a kid, I saw Sonny Siebert throw a no-hitter. So I thought that was kind of cool that I had a chance to do cover no-hitters and also to be a fan at them as well. But as far as being present for something huge, as an 11-year-old being taken to the NFL championship game in 1964 with my father and my big brother, that would be the big highlight, if you will, from that old place.
Wow.
When they beat the Colts in 27-0 in December of 1964. That was a huge memory for me. And it made my Christmas because I don't even remember what I got for Christmas that year. And 11 it's a pretty cool age to, you're still thinking of a lot of stuff. And I don't even know what I got for Christmas. All I knew was that in the time leading up to Christmas and the few days, I think it was on the 27th of December, but the time leading up to the game, that's all I wanted for Christmas was to be able to be at the game. And in those days, there were blackout rules. So, the games could not be shown locally. So I remember in a playoff game leading up to it, my dad would take me and my brother and a few of his friends and their boys to like a hotel room in Toledo, which was far enough outside of the quote unquote blackout area, so we could watch those games, and weren't fortunate enough to be at the game with tickets.
Do you still have that? Do you still have that ticket stub of that game?
I do not, but I do have a football from that football team. It's a white football. It's since faded, and it's really even hard to discern some of the autographs that are on it. But that's my one piece. But you know something, guys, sports. I understand the need for memorabilia and all that, but there's so many wonderful treasures I've got in my head and in my heart that were experiences that weren't documented. They're not NFTs. They're not social media moments. They just happened, and I have them in my head and in my heart. And it's kind of cool to have them with me anytime I want to call them up.
So, John, there was one thing that I know we have not talked about, and it just kind of popped into my head on our show, and maybe we need to explore it because it's been a kind of a long time, is indoor soccer down at the Coliseum. You know, I remember as a kid watching the Cleveland Force. You know, I'm not a soccer fan by nature, but I remember watching those, and they were really entertaining. Kai Hoskevy, you know, all those guys. Any memories uncovering, you know, the Cleveland Force and then the Cleveland Crunch?
Very big memories with the Force, and obviously in subsequent years the Crunch as well with Hector and those guys on those teams. But the Force was so big because they had these kind of 2-for-1 deals, and they had great in-season incentives to go down there. So they had great crowds, and I think the reason they were successful was largely on the sheer force of personality of Mr. Wolstein and his son Scott. And I will also add Mrs. Wolstein. She was an absolute force of nature. And I can recall, I had been in town for maybe 6-7 months. I can't recall exactly, but they had played, and we covered our share of games. I would go down to the Coliseum in between shows, and that's no easy trip anyway.
No.
To see soccer and obviously to see the Cavaliers back then. So I remember one time she approached me and kind of tried to read me the riot act why I'm not giving the Force more coverage, when afterwards her son had to tell her, Mom, he's really the one guy of the 3 stations that's covering us. So, you know, you might want to direct your comments elsewhere. The good memories of the Cleveland Force. They really had a stranglehold on a lot of they did it the right way. They engaged in the community with their players. And I don't think, you know, Doug Deacon would go out on Tuesdays and he would go to the charity of the week or what have you. And he was very giving like some of the Browns players were. But I don't think he was sanctioned by the Browns to do any of that stuff. He just did it because he's a good guy. Mm-hmm. Well, the Wolsteins, they said, you're our players and we have to grow this sport. In order to grow this sport, not only do you have to be great on the indoor soccer pitch, you've got to get out into the community and kind of show people who the Cleveland Force are. And I thought they really made that a successful franchise. And then it broke up. I think he had problems with the league, and he basically said, I'm going to take my ball and go home. And he disbanded the Cleveland Force. And that was unfortunate. I recall that was like during the Marty Schottenheimer Browns era. So It had to be like 87, 88. I don't have the exact year. But Cleveland Force was sorry for the pun, a force of its own right back when we covered sports.
Speaking of those mid to late 80s, there was some talk with Municipal Stadium at the time to put a dome on it and renovate it in a way where at the time that wasn't really possible, or you didn't see it in the NFL very often. What do you remember about those plans, the talk of that era? Because a lot of Browns fans and a lot of our younger listeners listening to this podcast may not know that the old Municipal Stadium at least had plans to renovate it in that time to put a dome on it.
Right. Called the Dome Stadium Corporation. Wasn't that what it was called?
Well, it was this. It was championed by a politician by the name of Vince Campanella. He was the county commissioner, and by him taking that under his wing and basically making it his, one of the big causes that he was going to push, it cost him his political career. It really did. I don't think people were ready for a dome stadium, but I can recall, guys, and this was a harbinger, if you will, of what was to come with the baseball stadium. And I remember, going to Toronto to do stories in the early 90s about this amazing stadium, the Sky Dome thing, and being there to interview officials of Toronto about what it would mean to Cleveland to do something similar to this. And boy, I look back and I say they wanted an outdoor stadium because Cleveland's Cleveland and it's football and all that stuff. I get that, but just think if they had been one of the forerunners in getting an indoor facility that you could have major events in, you would see a lot of those types of things happening in Cleveland instead of like the Indianapolises of the world. But there was a lot of discussion, guys, about a dome stadium in Cleveland, but it just didn't really, I saw the design. Some were like hexagonal in shape and all this weird stuff, but nothing ever, we were pretty good at talking up Storm about ideas for things to do, like a bridge to Canada and all of those types of things. And they just didn't take root.
Bridge to Canada. Now that would have been,
that would have
been an undertaking going right across Lake Erie.
You betcha. Crazy.
So John, so we're marching along here, kind of almost in chronological order. So take us to the mid-late 80s, right? The seeds were starting to get sown for what was soon to be the Cleveland Cavaliers, one of the, dominant teams in the NBA. We hear a lot about those guys even now. They're a tightly knit bunch, and it's more than 35 years ago or 35 years ago. Tell us a little bit about that. How you could kind of feel the Cavs getting ahead of steam after the early 80s, mid 80s, late 80s. Just take us back.
Well, I think getting Brad Daugherty was huge. This was one of the transcendent young talents that really played very little in college basketball. But I thought him coming to Cleveland and what was kind of cool, you had the scenario where you had the horrific early 80s because of the Stepien ownership and the laugh of the NBA that they were. You had him threatening to move the team to Toronto and the Cleveland media basically calling his bluff. I remember that night vividly because I flew to Toronto with him and a few other people to cover this story. He went to Toronto to say, we can bring a basketball team to you. But as he was doing that, he was just getting lambasted on the air by Pete Franklin and some of the sports talk people here in Northeast Ohio. So you went from the laughingstock of the NBA where they changed rules to keep the Cavaliers from, hurting themselves, to them getting rescued by the guns, to them eking out an existence, and to them getting world be free. And then they make the playoffs, and then they're in the middle of the 80s, and it's time for them really to take off. Wayne Embry's in place. You've got Lenny Wilkins, a Hall of Fame player, and obviously a phenomenal coach. He takes this young team of Daugherty, Price, and Ronnie Harper, and they build their resume. And then when they make the deal to get Larry Nance, they traded away Kevin Johnson. In those days, we could watch the entire practice. I think I've told you this, John. We could watch an entire practice. So I could see Kevin Johnson and Mark Price just going to battle in practice for like an hour and a half, just killing each other. And incredible competition. And then you'd see the product on the floor to the point where the Cavs felt they needed that defensive stopper in Nance. They could afford to give up a guy like Kevin Johnson, who was a very good player. And then they knew they had Mark Price, who turned out to be just one of the all-times. And so you get that team, and they were gelling, and it was just so much fun to watch. And the low point of their ascendance was the shot, definitely. I mean, you felt that they had the Bulls by the horns, no pun intended, and they could beat them. But Michael made the shot, and the rest is history. And then after that, you had the deal to send Ronnie Harper away and bring in Danny Ferry, and that upset just how they played hoops. But in those days, guys, it was a lot of fun. But you always had either the bad boys in front of them, or you had Michael Jordan and the Bulls. And being in the East, it was a real difficult road to hoe for them to get to an NBA final.
JT, we had Mark Price and Sean Kemp on the podcast over the last few months. Great interviews, great guys. Mark, you know this, JT. He's like my childhood idol, my favorite athlete of all time. Scott obviously knows that too. But, we asked them both, Kemp was a little younger, but knows his history. about the Ron Harper trade and, about Jordan Schott. I asked Mark, hey, if Cavs don't trade Ron Harper, would they win that title? Or would they get over Jordan's Bulls? He inclined to think they would. Sean Kemp thought if the Cavs never traded Harper way before he got in the league, or if the Cavs never incorporate or, faced Jordan, Cavs would have won at least maybe two titles of those late 80s, early 90s. You covered those teams. You were there. You knew all about it. What is your opinion on that take?
100%, without a doubt. They were on the way up. They were just a phenomenal joy to watch. They were just so much fun. They played the game the right way. They had an unselfish team. That's basically what you're seeing right now with the young Cavs here, with the Evan Mobleys and the Darius Garlands. Same kind of a makeup. And I just thought they were a beautiful thing to watch on so many occasions. That extra pass, that quote unquote hockey assist, if you will, that would take place when they played. That place was just rocking in those days. To be able to cover them and to be down there, their practices, and they were all characters. I mean, Brad was just a country boy that loved his NASCAR, and Brian and Mark Price was brought in almost like the choir boy, as you guys all well know from his days down in at Georgia Tech when he played for the Georgia Tech basketball team. And Ronnie Harper was kind of Jordan light, in some ways. Went on to have a fantastic career and won rings because he played with the one and only Michael Jordan. And they were just a lot of fun. It really, those years with that group of basketball players, and then the group that played at Municipal Stadium on Sundays, it was the same kind of a makeup, guys, because they had so much fun. They were a lot of guys that the fans loved, Bernie being first and foremost. And it was just a wonderful scenario to cover those teams and the different characters that were on the teams. Journalism, as you guys wanted to discuss a little bit, it was a little bit different then because the access wasn't parsed out to you the way it is now, where you either do it with the whole group or you don't do it at all. A lot of days I would go to a Cavs practice and my bosses would say, like Tony Ballou or Grant Zalba or the producers would say, so what's the angle today? And I would say, I have no idea. When I get down there, I'm definitely going to find a real good story because I'm going to talk to these guys and they're going to confide in me. They're going to, tell me something that might be noteworthy, or there may be a young player that we can focus on or what have you. And that's how it was, not just covering the Cavs or the Indians. It was the same way with the Browns. You'd be in that Browns locker room. You'd chat with Bob Golick for a few, how's your family? And you'd get some inside stuff from people that they trusted you to kind of keep and not, betray their confidences. And that's what journalism was, sports journalism was like back in those days. And the teams backed it up, obviously, on every Sunday that they played or every time the Cavaliers were out on that court.
So, John, we're going to go right to the 90s here. And you go to like 91, 92, the heyday of the Cavs, you could kind of see they were transitioning to the 90s Cleveland Cavaliers, the Mike Fratello, teams.
Yeah.
And the Indians were also transitioning. And at that point, we didn't know what they were transitioning into because they were, they lost 100 and some odd games in 1991.
Yeah.
Municipal Stadium was on its way out. So we got, the early mid 90s were a transition period on multiple fronts for the Cavs, for the Browns, and for the Indians. Let's start with the Indians here. Okay. We're going to go to like 1993, 94, 95. The ascension of the Indians was unlike anything we had ever seen. Take us back to that.
Well, acquiring Baerga, getting Sandy Alomar and Kenny Lofton, those guys really helped them jumpstart their procession towards the greatness that they achieved. And they had a guy with a lot of vision in their front office. And John was that kind of a general manager where he was the first executive to say, we have an ascending talent. We want to try to, get a couple of those years to the club's favor. And that's when those early extensions came for some of those players. And the Indians were among the first. And then we know the ballpark was being built, and same with the arena across the plaza. So those factors came into play. And, Grover, when they really took off, was the perfect manager. He was a product of the system. He played here, as everybody knew, and it was just so much fun covering the Indians. It started in '94. I know it was a weird year because of the work stoppage, and they didn't play a full season. There was no postseason that year, but you knew you had something really special. And it went back to that whole feeling we had, guys, with covering the Cavs, with all those cool characters. The Indians were the same way. You had that growly faced guy in Albert Bell that was just one of the most transcendent mashers baseball's ever had. You had him, you had Omar, you had Sandy, you had Jim Thome was young. I mean, in '95, I think Manny Ramirez was either hitting 8th or 9th, it was ridiculous. It was so much fun. And so it also coincided with the Browns leaving. And so the Indians had that town for the longest time. The Cavs were kind of, they had decent talent. And if it were not for having a very, very good coach in Mike Fratello, they would have just been a non-playoff team, never to make the postseason. I thought he was a great coach in Cleveland, and I'd love to have seen what he could do with this bunch that they have right now, or what Fratello could have done if he coached in the those Lenny teams with Harper and Price and what have you. So it was just a lot of fun covering the Indians back then. Every night was a sellout. The first time they made the playoffs, I remember that vividly. I believe you had, it was 1995 when they clinched. You just had a feeling that the way this team was constructed for a long time, they were going to be incredibly relevant. But then, you saw they played 6 games with the Braves, lost in the World Series, and there are already, some problems that are surfacing. What to do about Albert Bell? How long can you keep a guy like an Albert Bell? They were proactive on seeing the decline of Carlos Baerga, and that was a very unpopular move, but it was done, and they felt it was necessary. And so it was a lot of fun covering those guys. '97, being down in Miami, being at that stadium when they were just a couple of outs away from a World Series was, it was both thrilling, and then it brought my journalistic abilities to the fore because, since I started doing the job in Cleveland, it wasn't about, hey, I hope to cover championships. No, it's I hope to cover great stories. I hope to meet cool people and tell their stories. And that also includes when things don't go well. And so certainly had a lot of practice in that regard, things not going well. And that was a case of things not going that well for you when you blow a lead in the 9th inning when you're on the verge of your first, World Series championship since 1948.
Yeah, some of the best baseball teams in history of those Indians teams, not just in Cleveland, but of all time, failing to, clinch the title there. Let's talk about things going well. 2003, the Cavs drafting LeBron James. We all know what happened there. You covered him in high school, got to know him at a young kid at 15 years old. What was it like, JT, covering him in high school and then eventually him coming back in 2014?
Well, when he first got on the scene, he was so he kind of made his bones at a lot of those summer camps, and I remember the ABCD
Adidas camp, I think.
Yeah, the Adidas camp, the Adidas camp. He really made his bones there, and we all know he got on the cover of Sports Illustrated as a junior, and it was just wild. It was a lot of fun. I mean, first of all, he was so savvy in how to deal with the media, how to answer questions. I know he had media training. I know when he was a member of the Cavaliers, he worked with one of my good friends who was a former sports reporter at Channel 5, and Lisa coached him on his media savviness, if you will. But it was a lot of fun. I recall in 2003, I was out in Phoenix covering Ohio State championship in the national when they beat Miami with Coach Tressel, and we had half of a day off the day after they won before we were going to fly back the next day to Northeast Ohio, and that was the day that that LeBron and St. V was out in Los Angeles playing. I think Mater Dei, the high school, they're playing. This was when the championship tour was taking place for LeBron and all of his buddies. And I just remember being at this bar, and all these fans just incredibly fascinated by this guy. And, and so this was in Arizona. His appeal was so, he's like one of the first as advertised young athletes that was spouted to be the next great thing. And the whole world got to watch. See, we didn't see Michael Jordan's ascendancy because he wasn't as big of a deal, but we saw LeBron from age 15 on, and all the expectations that they had for him, he met them and he exceeded them. So it was really cool to cover his career when it started with the Cavaliers. I wasn't shocked by how great he became and how quickly he became, the star that he was. But I also knew that there would be some tough dealings with how do you handle a young superstar like this, and can you keep him happy? And he had never been anywhere, so you could not fault him for wanting to see what is else out there. And obviously, we know he did find something else out there, because for 4 years he played down in Miami, and he's obviously one of the most fascinating characters, athletes that I've covered, and not just for what he has done physically on the basketball floor and how he conducts himself, but just his stance on social issues. Just he's like that, the new age young athlete that knows exactly how to get his message out to the world, and he has not hesitated to do it. So it's been a blast. It was a blast covering him, both iterations of LeBron James, 1.0 and 2.0.
John, you brought up a really good point, because there's always comparisons between LeBron and Jordan athletically, on the court. But you brought up a very good point, because Michael Jordan, when he came up and he was drafted, unless you followed college basketball, he wasn't as big of a deal that early on. And I remember Jordan was telling the story, he's drafted, he's coming into Chicago, he lands, and there's no one to pick him up. He has to find his own transportation in order to meet with the team. That's not how it was. Like you mentioned, LeBron was already that almost like for lack of a seasoned veteran at age of 18.
Yeah, he was like a mythical figure, because, this was when ESPN was really starting to take off on getting as much content other than the major sports, if you will. And so they saw a great avenue to show this young talent, and they hitched their wagon onto the LeBron James Express, because they knew that he would be worth not just viewership for them, but as they moved into the internet era, clicks and page views and all of those things. He's cash money for them. And he delivered. Again, he gave them drama, he gave them championships, he gave them a spectacular athlete who is proven to be first ballot Hall of Fame and in the conversation with Michael as the GOAT. And that's what he has been all about. And so, kudos to ESPN for seeing that. And we certainly knew it. We knew that anytime we did stories about LeBron, and anytime that we covered him, his Hummer controversy when he was in high school, and we knew that it was just people would want to hear those stories. I remember, guys, when he got suspended by the OHSAA for having his mom buying him or arranging to have that Hummer vehicle become his. I remember we broke into programming at 4:00 in the afternoon on some Tuesday, and I'm telling you that LeBron James has been suspended by the OHSAA. Unthinkable. I'm doing interviews with Bob Golick, who's doing radio in Los Angeles, about this kid in Cleveland that's got his mom bought him a Hummer, and it was insane to handle that stuff back in the day. It's crazy.
Wow. That's crazy. I didn't know you guys broke into programming like that. That's just the impact LeBron had. So JT, real quick, do you think LeBron is better than Jordan, greatest of all time? That's the biggest topic of conversation still, because LeBron's 37 and still dropping the crazy stats this day and age. What do you think?
Well, I think LeBron is the better all-around basketball player, skills, ability to dish, to elevate his teammates. But Michael's the greater winner, the greater champion, if you will. And Michael did the tougher thing. Michael never left with his hand-picked group of guys to go chase a championship. He stayed in Chicago, and he did it the tough way. And obviously he won 6 of them, which is still, better than LeBron. So my edge goes to Michael Jordan as the GOAT. Absolutely. Over those two. If you're just going those two guys, my edge goes to Michael over LeBron.
So take us to the 2016, the world champion Cleveland Cavaliers. Take us to that night.
Well, that night was spectacular. Part of me wanted to be split in half because I saw all the reaction in Cleveland, on the streets of Cleveland, people standing on top of cars, honking their horns, hugging strangers, people going crazy. And part of me wanted to be in the middle of that. But, excuse me, the sportscaster, the sports journalist in me wanted to be there when the team actually won the championship. And I didn't have the greatest view of the ending of that game because as our jobs dictated, in order to be able to get into the locker room, you had to be in queue. You had to be lined up outside of the locker room. So I was like 3rd or 4th in line with my cameraman, Darcy Ayers, who was just a beast that night. He was so fantastic. And we were waiting for this game. We saw the shot by Kyrie. We saw the block. We saw the end of the game on this little tiny, I'm doing this Zoom call with you guys on my iPad. And I saw that final great plays of that championship on a TV that was not much bigger than my iPad, not much at all. So I'm watching that, having I was really excited for them. And then it was just a surreal night, guys, because the team comes, off the floor after their on-court celebration. They all filter into the locker room. LeBron shows up holding both trophies, the MVP and the O'Brien, and then they go in. And then all of a sudden, family members start to walk into the locker room. And we're still waiting. And we're getting impatient because we want to get in there. We know they're in there doing their celebration. We understand that. But so many people went into that locker room. It was like a clown car getting filled up by about 75 people. And you're wondering, where are they going to stick all those people? So those people go in there, and after about 10 minutes or so, they let us in. And by the time we got into the locker room, there still was plenty of champagne that was being sprayed around. But we get into the locker room, and there's about an inch of champagne on the floor, the entire locker room. So they really must have done some amazing spraying. And the first person I interviewed was Kyrie. And see, people have to understand, we had a live unit that Darcy was carrying on his back. And it's a contraption that allows you to go live back in Cleveland. They took me live in that locker room. And I don't think we were on a delay, but Kyrie said the F word. And I made that effing shot. And we never got any flack, so I'm assuming we were on enough of a delay for people back in Cleveland to filter that out. And that was just the start of the interviews with all the guys. And it was a wonderful feeling. And then you take it to 3 days later when the parade took place in Cleveland. And again, when that happened, I got so many folks that were fellow media members coming up to me, or Rizzo referring on the air about this, or Brian Windhorst or whomever. Hey, I'm happy for John Telich. You got a chance to see it. Guys, it was about Cleveland. I think that parade said it all. That championship, and you saw so many people come into downtown Cleveland, had nothing to do with the journalists. It was about those fans that have had faith in their city, love their city. It was being it was being ripped apart by national pundits about, Cleveland is not a winning type of a town. And it was a great day and a great period of time in our lives for the city to shine. And LeBron brought that to Cleveland, and I'll always be grateful to him for him doing that, because without LeBron in town in 2016, there's obviously no championship for this city.
Yeah, you look at that parade real quick, JT. Think about all the people that were there. Just imagine if the Browns would ever win a Super Bowl, how many more people would be downtown?
Oh, man.
It would. I can't even put into words how many people would show up. I mean, maybe the weather being bad in February of one year would prohibit some of it. But you guys know we had a parade for an 0-16 football team. So I think people would show up if the Browns ever won a Super Bowl.
So JT, with our podcast, as you know, we like to do rapid fire questions at the end. They're
Sure.
real, short questions. Before I get to that, and this is kind of like a little inside thing, I want to ask you, do you have any good Danny Coughlin stories? The question is, how many good Danny Coughlin, of course, we hope to have him on the show. Mr. He loves technology, in case everyone wants. No, not really. Do you have any good Danny? Right. Any good Danny Coughlin stories who, used to work at Fox 8, still does Friday Night Touchdown?
Well, I love Danny, first of all, and he's one of the greatest storytellers, not just in Cleveland sports media history, but in Cleveland history. He's so fantastic at telling a story. And he really is the quintessential storyteller because he can gather his stories in any kind of a venue. And the joke always was, I'd be running the shop. I'd go out and do my couple stories, get everything put to bed for my pieces. I'd tell Casey what we had, or if it was the Rizzo era, I'd tell Rizzo what we had, blah, 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 blah. And then Danny would finish his piece, and then it'd be like 5 o'clock, and he'd look at me, and he'd start licking his chops and going, JT, it looks like it's time for a little research, which meant he was heading to a local tavern to see. And you know what? He was doing his work when he was there. I'm not painting it out to be this, he was dominated by the need to go get a drink. This is not what I'm saying at all. Right. He knew that the characters or the people that were insiders and the movers and the shakers would once in a while saddle up next to him at the bar, and he'd find out and he still does it to this day. I was with him less than a month ago, and he was jotting stuff down while we were talking. I think he was going to write something about the Albert in Phoenix who calls Rizzo all the time, which is Albert Bell.
Albert in Scottsdale. Yeah.
Scottsdale. You're right. I'm sorry, Phoenix, Scottsdale. So Danny's the best. I met Danny Coughlin. One of my greatest thrills in sports was covering the 1980 Winter Olympics. I covered USA winning the gold medal in hockey against the Russians, when they beat the Russians and then went on and win the gold. So I met Danny Coughlin. He was in Lake Placid as well in 1980 as a reporter, writer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And that's when I met Danny. And so this was a mythical figure to me, the sports writer in Cleveland, and there he was. And little did I know in, February of 1980, that within a year or so, I'd be in Cleveland working my hometown. And then within that same frame of time, he would be joining Channel 8 and becoming one of my not only longtime colleagues, but longtime friends. He's just the best. And he's still going strong. And so far as we know, Danny will be having a part in Friday Night Touchdown this fall with our cast of thousands. It's going to be a blast.
I've had some interaction with Danny back in 2007 when I was your intern, JT. And man, when Scott says about him not liking technology, I remember the printer always causing
the printer.
I
love the printer story.
My gosh.
He's over there.
Well, someone had a brilliant idea, guys. When we were getting ready for Friday Night Touchdown, this is 11, 12 years ago or whatever. Let's have a live camera on the sports area as we're getting ready for the show that they wanted to put on the web. I don't know whose idea it was, but I'm sure there were some people that were watching this in spaces all over the globe because you could get it on the internet, seeing this guy standing up and down and just cursing at his computer like every 15, 20 minutes. And that was Dan Coughlin. And surprised no fines were levied against the station for this guy cursing up a storm because he to this day he's just not in love. He still does have a flip phone. That's no lie, and God bless him. God bless him for that. Still works.
We're looking forward to getting Dan Coughlin on the podcast and hearing.
We might have to go over there. We might have to dial in or
You're not doing that on Zoom, boy.
No.
So, JT, what's your favorite Cleveland restaurant? Do you have one? Do you have a couple?
Well, my daughter works at Southside in Tremont, so I'll give them a shout out. But we've had a lot of fun getting food at a place called Beach Club Bistro in Euclid. Great pizzas, and so that would be a favorite. And my oldest boy was married, and Soho in Ohio City is the restaurant where we held the reception. We closed the restaurant and held it there. And I would say that's one of my favorites as well. Just fantastic food, great atmosphere, cool bar that people, like to sit around and talk sports or what have you. And so those are two or three that I'd mention.
I've been to Soho. They have some really good chicken and waffles.
Oh, it's the best.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Favorite TV show you're streaming? Because you're a hip guy, JT. You watch all the hip shows that we all watch and all the kids watch. You're so finely tuned into everything. Even when Game of Thrones was going on, you were dialed in, man. What is your favorite show you're streaming now?
Well, I'm literally just engulfing everything that Taylor Sheridan is producing. He has done Yellowstone. He's doing a show that's the prequel to it called 1883. He is going to start a show called 666 Ranch, I believe. And he's just fantastic. Yellowstone to me, and I'm all up to date. It's been 4 seasons now. So, they've gone through their 4 seasons. Yellowstone is kind of like, it's the Sopranos with horses and steers and things of that nature. It's just the beautiful epic vistas of Yellowstone out there in Montana is just remarkable, and the storytelling and the characters. The star is Kevin Costner. He's the head of this big family that owns this incredible ranch, and there's just many incredible characters that are within the confines of the show. So yeah, I would say my newest one is Yellowstone, but I've seen all the other ones. Ozark.
Yeah.
I just love a lot of the stuff we're in a great age, guys, for this type of television. We really are.
We got to get on that Yellowstone train, Scott, because we had Dave Logan, former Browns wide receiver, on a few weeks ago, and he was hawking up Yellowstone. Love all the minutes there. He loved it so much.
I've watched a couple episodes, and it's like, it really sucks you in. You in. I love the production value, and it's just like it, and because we took a trip out to Yellowstone last summer, and it's like, wow, this is, you almost want to go back and live out there, honestly.
Well, I lived in the Black Hills of South Dakota. We lived there our first year of our marriage, and it's not quite Yellowstone. I mean, obviously Yellowstone is epic, but I loved the people out there. I love the mountains. I love everything about that part of the country. So I've got a real hankering for that kind of storytelling and the vistas and the way they shoot this thing. It's just really good stuff. If you guys ever want to try it.
Right. So here, I'm going to kind of combine two of these rapid fire questions together.
Yeah.
All right. So your all-time favorite sports event you covered, and your favorite athlete and coach you covered or interviewed. Maybe they're part of the same group. What do you think?
The greatest thing I've covered would be the Cavs championship. And I'd say the greatest athlete that I've ever covered would be LeBron. Now, I didn't cover him per se, but I did have a chance when I was in Buffalo to interview Muhammad Ali. And I felt as a young 25-year-old back then, that was like, I thought I was done with my career and I could retire. It was so epic. Greatest coaches. Marty was a fantastic coach. That's that I've covered. Well, you know what? I'll go down on the high school level. I'll give it to Chuck Kyle of St. Ignatius. He's won 11 championships, and no one is more respected in his field than the head coach at St. Ignatius High School. So I'll give it to Chuck. And this, by the way, is his swan song year too. He's going to retire after this football season.
And that's one thing we didn't cover here was the years of covering high school football, because there's so much to cover. I mean, we could do 2 episodes on just your coverage of high school football and the history of that, I'm sure.
I love it. And I'm so happy and grateful that Andy Fishman and the gang at Channel 8 said, JT, you can hang around and do Friday Night Touchdown until you're old and gray. And I said, well, I'm halfway there, so let's do it.
JT, favorite Cleveland sports memory outside of maybe 2016 and the Len Barker perfect game while working at Channel 8. Outside of those 2 that you were working, give us another one we haven't talked about.
Okay, let's see. Let's go. Let's pick Browns. Double overtime win against the New York Jets the week before they lost to Elway in the drive game at Municipal Stadium. 2 overtimes. They came back. They were left for dead with 5 minutes to go after a touchdown by Freeman McNeil of the Jets. Then Mark Gastineau had a roughing the passer penalty on Bernie that gave the Browns new life. They go down, they score, they force overtime, they go to 2 OTs, and they win it on a field goal. That I've never heard or felt that stadium louder than that moment, save for when the Browns scored to go up by a touchdown against the Broncos the next week before John Elway shut the stadium's, the level of sound down to basically nothing when they beat the Browns.
So JT, you're an athlete, as everybody knows here. Man. You do marathons, ultra runs, all this stuff that I can't even wrap my head around. But besides all of that, and I know that's a lot there, besides trail running, what's your favorite hobby?
I'd love to read. And I will say, guys, I'm really in this era of internet explosion, if you will, and the amount of things that are competing for your attention, and my attention span isn't as great as it used to be. I don't sit down and read part of a book for 2 or 3 hours the way I used to, but that is a hobby of mine, to try to get enough time to just sit down and read anything from, mostly like mysteries or whodunits or espionage kinds of novels, those types of things. I enjoy that. And I love writing too. And that's what I'll be doing after I retire. I'll just be, focusing on a subject and doing some writing on it, whether or not it gets on the printed page or if it becomes part of like a podcast. That's something that I would do.
A final rapid fire question for you, JT, and it's a two-parter. Yeah. One, as you head into your retirement coming up here in early February, give your best advice to any sports journalists or broadcaster or any young listener who's maybe breaking into the business now.
Sure.
That's listening, or ones that like already established, like Scott and myself, people that are still growing and learning.
Sure.
And then I have a second part, but I'll ask that after you answer this.
John, never lose your curiosity. Curiosity can take you to great places. It can open up avenues that you never thought possible. So always have that curiosity, and be, as I just said in my previous answer, be as well read as possible. And I don't mean mysteries. I think just material. Be, tackle a subject that you can be adept in. I remember when I told you when you were trying to get your first job, find something that you're really knowledgeable about it, and then let the world know, because you've got that talent. Baseball, football, whatever it is, and take the time to establish your, I know people hate to hear the word, but your brand, but let people know that John Sabol, Scott Sabol are about this and can tell you stories that only they can tell, because they're special in what they do.
And final follow-up to that, JT, is, you're moving on after 41 years in television in Cleveland. You're retiring in February. I start actually the day after you do. I know we'll still work together though on Friday Night Touchdown, which is great for me, because I finally get to work with you, someone who I grew up watching on TV, and then of course, growing up with you and you becoming a mentor to me. So, what are you going to be doing now as you head to that next phase of your life into retirement? What are you going to be doing instead of going to Browns practice and all that?
Well, I'm not going to have a love affair with my telephone the way I did before, guys. It won't be as crazy. I don't think I'll be, I won't be one of those heads down people as much as I was before, because you really do get tied to that, and it's stressful. So I won't miss that, but I will be, going to events that I wasn't able to get to before, whether it is an, ultra marathon in another state or far away, where I could say, I can't do it. In past years, I would say I can't take part or even attend it because of Brown season or this or that. So I'll be able to have the ability to do that. And my wife and I love to hike, and that's where the national parks are going to come into play, where we'll get out to the Yellowstones of the world or to the Grand Canyons or what have you, and to be able to do those types of things. But I'll still be doing, as I mentioned before, I love to tell stories. So, podcasting's a venue where you can do that. Writing is another way. So I'll have my fingers. I'll always be exploring. My late father-in-law, my wife's pop, passed away about 5 months ago. He was 97, and he was just always had this insatiable curiosity about the world. And he was always trying to find out more. And he wanted people to know things that he learned. He had such a great excitement. I think that's what kept him to be, a long-lived individual. And that's what I hope to do. Continue to have that thirst and knowledge to be better.
Oh, hey, no problem, JT. I tell you what, that's a big deal. Always keep learning. JT, man, for every story you have, there's always a bunch more questions. But you know what? We're going to end it here, and I'm sure we're going to have you on the show again here in the not too distant future once we get into the heart of springtime. John, do you have anything else, John? I mean, I'm sure you do, but
yeah, like Scott said, we could keep going on and on for hours and hours. I guess one little question for you: Dan Coughlin has written many books.
Yes.
Is writing anything for you that you would want to do in terms of writing a book of just your journey in working in Cleveland sports for 41 years?
Well, I'd like to do, I would like to write things that I was involved in, but I'd like to tell the stories. One of my favorite podcasters is Malcolm Gladwell, and Malcolm, he's a phenomenal writer, and you'd be just as happy seeing what he puts out on the printed page. But he can tell stories and then use the sound bites. And that's the essence of creative storytelling / podcasting in this day and age. So that's what I would, if I'm writing something, my take on something, it would be that something I'd put out there on that kind of a format. So stay tuned, as they say.
JT, it's been an honor and a pleasure working with you for just about 20 years at Fox 8. And I know my brother, buddy. It's been great, and we wish you all the best. I know you still got a few more weeks here at the station, but we wish you the best. We wish you and your wife and your family nothing but the best here, and just enjoy your time. You've earned it.
Thank you very much. I really plan on doing that. Just enjoying my wife. She has been my rock. She has been my inspiration. She has been everything to me, and I don't make this journey. It wouldn't be pleasurable to be on this journey if it were not for the woman I've always called the bride, and she will remain the bride, even though we're past 45 years of marriage, but she is the bride. That's my girl. Congratulations
on that. 45 years. That's incredible. And congratulations again on 41 years working in Cleveland and television at Fox 8. Thank you, JT, for coming on. And thank you again for always helping me in my career. Just as a 17-year-old kid, shadowing you one Saturday evening to your intern. And then as I grew into this crazy business, all your help and guidance has been greatly appreciated. So I personally cannot thank you enough. And I'm looking forward to falls finally working with you on Friday Night Touchdown, which is going to be a treat for me. I'm excited about that too, John. And I think you've already got it within your heart. Just pay it forward. That's all I ask. Just pay it forward. Well said. Thanks, guys. Thanks, JT.
John, that brings up a lot of memories, all those stories from the cardiac kids, and I was barely old enough to remember that all the way up almost to the present time. The one thing, and I don't want to recap all the sports stuff because JT did such a great job, but the one thing I don't think people understand and know about John Telich is that when we raise money at the station, when we do anything related to the community, especially when times are tough, and when times are tough, regardless of what it is, whether it's Christmas presents, whether it's bringing a lot of different material for school kids, he's the first one at the station and the last one to leave. He's one of the most selfless individuals I've ever had a chance to work with, one of the most selfless people I've had a chance to know in my lifetime. Something that I think, if anything, people should model their lives after the work that he's done. Yeah. And you know what? He said something at the very end right there that really hits home to me. Pay it forward. He says, just remember to pay it forward. And that could be in your community, donating your time, helping other people. And one aspect that I think people would want to know about John Telich, about paying it forward, is helping other people in the industry. I know countless times of colleagues and friends of mine in the business as young broadcasters years ago, and even to this day, have reached out to him, someone that he has never even met, through LinkedIn, through Twitter, and just to establish a communication with. And he'll take his time and exchange emails, phone calls, give them advice, critiques on their resume, and just help out the fellow broadcaster. So for me, I've seen that personally for myself, but also for other colleagues that I know that have never met him, that don't know what he has done in the industry or in the city. So it's really cool to see him do that. And it's something that everyone should do in this industry, but also in real life too. You have to pay it forward in some way to help out
other people in your community. Absolutely.
No, absolutely. And I think we'll end it right there. Want to thank John Telich for being a guest. I'm sure we'll have him on the show too. As he heads off into retirement, he'll be doing a lot more with Friday Night Touchdown at Fox 8 heading into the fall. And I'm sure we'll have some other involvement too with other great projects. So check out all of our podcasts here. We've had a whole bunch of them here going back to the middle of the summer of last year. You can check out Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast on Apple and on Spotify. You can follow me on Twitter. If you have any messages, any questions, critiques, you can send me a message at Scott Sabol Fox 8.
You can follow me at John_Sabol. You can follow John Telich, who is just our guest, at John Telich 8 on Twitter. He's a great follow and a great wealth of knowledge too for some sports stuff. And then you can follow our podcast where we post and tease upcoming episodes on Twitter at Sabol Brothers on Twitter as well. Well, thank you for listening, everyone. We'll see you guys and hear you next time right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. You're listening to Sabol Brothers and the Baseline Podcast. Scott, we'll talk soon, man. Take care.
Talk to you later, John.